A few months ago, I declined an acceptance into a master's program, but I didn't want to lose my love of education. In fact, this was one of my main motivations in starting this channel. And with the help of a handful of recommendations from my favorite professors, here I am taking the first step with this video. A video that hopefully helps to continue your education too, because the best way to learn something is to explain it to someone else. If you stick around, I will give you the way I tackle these difficult books and understand them to the best of my ability. Now, I know reading is not for everyone, nor is it easy to find time for. There's just so much going on, and I can't tell you how many days I spent scrolling YouTube, looking at other books, or watching a movie rather than reading the book that I had told myself I was going to read and that I wanted to read. That being said, if you are really serious about film and really serious about learning and growing as a filmmaker or just as an audience member, watching movies can only take you so far. In fact, by not reading, you shut yourself off from essential understandings of how film works and what it can do. The World Viewed is a book by American philosopher Stanley Cavell. He taught at Harvard and discussed topics from Ralph Waldo Emerson to Hollywood comedies of remarriage and much, much more. The World Viewed was first published in 1971, before home video and just at the beginning of New Hollywood. In fact, it probably wasn't even called New Hollywood at that point. At first glance, this earlier time frame may seem to limit his observations and their value to us today. And I will admit, it does limit them some. But the cinematic form was already pretty set by 1971, and that is what we're here to look at. The World Viewed has 19 chapters in total. And for a bonus round, the expanded edition includes his updates, revisions, and refutations entitled More of the World Viewed. As you can tell, this book covers a lot of topics. It contains all sorts of great observations and little nuggets. But I'll leave most of those for you to uncover on your own. And I promise the fancy philosophical chapter names aren't always as bad as they seem. Although he does say, I have been told I have made a difficult book, a sometimes incomprehensible book. So with those words of encouragement to lift our spirits, let's jump into the book's main point. Cinema is based around reality. The term realism is thrown around a lot in any film discussion, especially those that take place in a classroom. It's first thrown around when discussing neorealism and its use of non-actors in real locations. Then the term will pop up again when discussing the French New Wave and the works of Godard, Varda, and others like them. And the bridge between these two major hotspots of realism is a single man, André Bazin, because he both wrote extensively on neorealism and was a founder of the French New Wave through Cahiers du Cinéma. Bazin is the spiritual ancestor of this book, as is a certain Panofsky, who I'm not so familiar with, but I will be looking into now. And these two figures' combined interest in reality and its connection with cinema led to some false claims or bad ideas, at least in Cavell's eyes, and in my own as well. For Cavell, film is not reality itself or a mold like Bazin sometimes posits, but it is instead something else entirely. Cavell defines movies as a succession of world projections. In his words, we can break down the definition like this. Succession includes the various degrees of motion in moving pictures, the motion depicted, the current of successive frames in depicting it, and the juxtaposition of cutting. Automatic emphasizes the mechanical fact of photography, in particular the absence of the human hand in forming these objects and the absence of its creatures in their screening. World covers the ontological facts of photography and its subjects. And finally, projection points to the phenomenological facts of viewing and to the continuity of the camera's motion as it ingests the world. Now, I know that was a lot, and it was definitely a lot the first few times I read it, but to put it very, very simply, movies are made up of motion, both continuous and not. They are shot by cameras that are immune to our influence. They capture reality, and we eventually view them on a screen of some variety. The two primary components in this definition, and the two he emphasizes most prominently, are automatic and projection.
So when Cavell says automatic, what he is referencing is what he calls automatism, or the idea that the camera is a dumb machine that can only capture what is directly set in front of it. Of course, we can change the angle, we can change the lighting, even we can turn a light off, but at the end of the day, What is in front of the camera is ultimately still me. This is important because it means that there's some base level of reality to film. And this explains why that we find them immersive, why we can be moved by them. Why can we cry when no one really died in a movie? Because on some level, there is a base reality there that we buy into and understand. And once we have bought into this reality, we can then move on to the second key portion of his definition, which is projection.
Boson's tendency to speak of film as reality itself, or a mold, always felt a little disingenuous to me, as I cannot smell or touch the characters or objects on screen, sometimes disappointingly, but most of the time thankfully. This caused me to move away from Boson and other realist conceptions of film to much more ethereal ideas about what film is. But Cavill noted this failing of Boson's as well, and addresses it head on. He notes that the camera captures reality, but by the time it reaches our eyes, it is on a screen. We buy into its reality and are thereby present to it. But the film is never present to us. The fact that we are present when watching a film, but the characters are not, may seem quite basic to us today, but it's an important fact to recognize and be aware of, because without it, movies would be indistinguishable from reality. And while it may not directly be reality, our presence and the fact that film captures reality allows an investment and belief in the world of a film without destroying our own. So a quick summary of the major point of this book is its argument that the ontology, or the nature of being a film, is based around projected reality. Reality is captured automatically by the camera, and no matter how we distort the image, it will always be there. We can never get rid of reality. And once it is captured, this reality is then projected onto a screen, which we are present to, but it is not present to us. Cinema does not replace our reality, but reality is the stuff of which it is made. This is of course a simplification, but I hope it has done his points at least some justice. And now that we understand his basic argument of why film is reality-based, we can turn to what exactly this tells us, how we should be watching movies, and how we should be making them. But there is some elephants in the room that have to deal with the pitfalls and struggles with this conception of reality that some of you probably already saw. So let's go ahead and tackle those first. The digital image and cartoons are the two biggest threats to his theory that I see, and that you probably saw as well while I was describing it. Firstly, being written in 1971 and updated only later in the 70s, perhaps the biggest threat to his conception of cinema as constructed out of reality is the digital image, which includes everything from digital image capturing, image manipulation, and, of course, CGI. The films he was discussing had direct negatives, artifacts of reality, but now we only have vague lines of code. Once CGI and computer processing are thrown into the mix, all semblance of reality is seemingly thrown out the window. On the surface, it seems that an entirely CGI image does not have to have any tie to reality. But there is a surprisingly good counter to this brought up by Cavill, albeit he was defending his theory against practical effects. He says, for the point of all elaboration of machinery is exactly that it will score for reality, from the camera's point of view. Just look at Avatar 2. The 3D and digital cinematography there may have blurred our perception of what is real and what is not at face value, but it is all there for immersion. It is supposed to stand for reality. We aren't supposed to recognize the CGI as CGI, or this is manipulated and this not. It's all supposed to be believable and immersive. The real question here comes with newer forms of cinema, like Rehearsals for Retirement, Sleep Has Her House, and other cutting-edge digital films that sometimes contain no trace of reality, or constantly draw our attention to the immersive unreality of digital filmmaking. But here I think reality still factors in, but as a base on which to build. We are so used to being immersed in a world when we see a movie that we can enter these digital worlds, these fake worlds, easily. We just expect them to be real. Reality is a given when going to see a movie. And the power of these films and their immersive unreality speaks directly to that. And this will hold true at least until digital filmmaking ventures fully into uncharted, chaotic waters. So even in the outer reaches of film, even on the cutting edge or the avant-garde, reality still has a role, even if it is just a base that we take for granted and is built off of. Back within the bounds of cinema, there is now animation, a form which removes all reality, or at least most, outside of the voice of actors. Cavill's defense here is that they simply aren't movies. He, of course, provides a variety of reasons, citing their ignorance or blatant disregard for reality, but none of them really convinced me. Now, this doesn't destroy his theory in my eyes, but it does poke holes or at least show a weak spot. After all, so much is shared between animation and film. I would say that both allow us to be sucked into them as if they were reality. In my eyes, reality still plays a part here in our emotional experience, similar to the reality we take for granted in the digital image, even if it is in a less obvious capacity. All of this is to say that Cavill's emphasis on realism has quite a bit of weight in our experience and understanding of film, but I'm held back from fully ascribing to it. Even if we cannot get fully behind his theory though, there are things it can teach us as filmmakers and as audience members. Firstly, our goal as filmmakers is never to recreate reality. It's already captured, which means we can focus instead on what to do with reality, how to change it, and how to mold it. This reminds me of something I heard at Shane Black's panel at Austin Film Fest this year, where he made fun of those people that sit on the bus and try to listen to how real people talk to get their cadence, their voice, their lingo, which I think we've all done at one point or another. And he pretty much just straight up laughed at that and said, that's not what movies are. And I think that's very much what he was getting at, that movies already capture reality. What we then have to do is make the dialogue more interesting, add something else in. We have to change reality and mold it to fit the story. And secondly, as an audience member, which is what most of us are most of the time, we are to open up to the film, not looking for its unreality or its difference from our own, but looking for what it does with reality. Of course, internal reality, reality within the world of the film, is important, but the reality I exist in is fundamentally different from the reality on screen, and one does not have to dictate the other. This is, of course, only the tip of the iceberg contained within this book, and now as I'm about to leave you to venture out to this book and other incomprehensible books like it, I think it's finally time to give you my 2 rules for reading difficult books like this. Firstly, you have to trust yourself. You're not going to understand everything 100%. I still definitely don't understand everything that takes place in that book, and not all the little details make perfect sense yet. But that being said, if you feel like you understand something, you probably do. Maybe not 100%, so always be willing and ready to learn more. But if you feel like you do, you probably actually do. So don't be afraid to venture out there and see what you learn. And secondly, you have to make books like these your own. These large textbook-like volumes that have tons of fancy terms and tons of history and terminology and are just very dense reads, you can't just sit down and read them like they're any other book. And if you try to, what you're going to end up doing is just overloading your brain. It's going to be a slog to get through. So instead, act like you're exploring someone's ideas. Venture out there, see what they have to offer, and if something doesn't interest you, move on. Look at something else or another idea that you do think you'll actually use and find interesting. We aren't receptacles of information, but we're more boiling pots. So just go ahead and boil away the stuff that doesn't interest you. But you do have to be careful here, because you don't want to just throw out an idea that you don't fully understand, because once you understand that, it may be very interesting. So make sure to always understand the idea you're getting rid of, and don't really get rid of it. Just shift your focus to something else. And if you do this, you'll actively engage with the book and it'll become more alive to you. You'll find more things interesting, and you won't overload your brain with information that you aren't going to use or don't find interesting. So those are my 2 rules for reading difficult books like this. I know they're pretty general, but that's how I've always approached them in a broad sense. And with that out of the way, it is time for me to say goodbye. But before I do, don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this video. There will be more stuff like this on the way, a new video essay in about a month. And in the meantime, drop some comments. Let me know what you think I should review, what you would like to see me break down, or what book you think I could lend an understanding to, or that I would benefit from reading. And in the meantime, until then, hope you have a great day, and adios. I hope this brief dive into a great book has sparked some interest within you and taught you a little something, because it definitely did for me.